Welcome to another episode of Event Marketing Redefined. I am Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Today we have a fun show and a really important topic, and I think something that is being scrutinized in events, which is obviously ROI, how to maximize it, how to quantify, measure, calculate, all of those important aspects of it. So today I have François Fournier, and he's the Director of Global Events at DTN. And when him and I talked initially, one of the most interesting things that came from our conversation was he felt like he had a bit of a system when it comes to ROI and what he calls cost of conversations. So we started talking about it, decided to do a show on it. And as I said, it's a big topic right now, which is the sense that I think before COVID, companies were essentially going to events and spending the money, and ROI wasn't as big of a topic. You came out of COVID, we kind of got things rolling again, and essentially now people want to know where these dollars are going and why. I think we realized that events do work with them being gone during COVID, but then once they came back and they got rolling, now people want to know, okay, let's get dialed with this money a little bit more and understand how this is being a catalyst for pipeline. So Francois, welcome. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for having this conversation. I appreciate it.
No, thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's talk about it. You said that you kind of developed a unique methodology to measure and value the ROI, of commercial events and trade shows. So tell me a little bit about your approach, how you figured it out, how you got started.
Sure. But first of all, I agree with what you said, right? I mean, in-person events, trade shows are back. I work for TN is a software company. So we sell a software to the energy, weather intelligence, and agribusiness. So there's a tons of trade shows, right? So we use shows to promote our products. It's key for us to be able to meet clients, do demonstration, live connection. And like you said, after COVID, there was just so many trade shows, conferences, smaller events. It's really back to back. And we're at a point where we really need to measure where the dollar is going, what's our return. And we have to renew these events every year. So basically, to answer your questions about when it started, I did a certification about 8 years ago called CTSM, and that stands for Certified Trade Show Marketer. And hours of like different module. And one of the module was events, measurements, and ROI analysis. And it was just one module I took, and I really liked it. I felt it was kind of an eye opener, and I connected very well with the teacher. And it was kind of a basic methodology to look at an event, how much you spend, how do you calculate ROI. So I kind of took that template and customized it based on where I was at that time. And I really developed a methodology for trade show. I mean, it's any type of commercial event where there's a cost to produce and then there's revenue on the other side. So that's how it started, right? 8 years ago when I did my CTSM certification.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, the CTSM program is a very good program. There's a lot of really good education there. I've actually taught classes on the CTSM program. So I know the process that you go through to create classes and their curriculum. It's a very serious curriculum, right? It's well run. So I think it's interesting when we start talking about measurement and you're talking about like the bandwidth of shows that you have, and then kind of everything just kind of ends up getting jumbled together. Right? When you have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30 plus shows, some companies with a ton of shows, and it just starts to just get this big puddle of mush, right? As you go, and you have to find a way to be able to start to delineate between shows, delineate between ROI, which ones are working, which ones are not, what sort of pipeline is being added and impacted from each individual show. So tell me, when you first started utilizing this method, right? Like, what were some struggles that you had as you were beginning to install it?
Yeah. So the first struggle is basically you rely on sales, right, to give you the data. So first challenge is you need to connect really well with salespeople. I mean, they're the one who travel to the shows. You don't necessarily attend every single trade show. So you need to have a really great line of communication with the teams, because they need to provide you with information, like what's the average deal size when they go to a trade show? How much time does it take to sell a product? What's the closing rate, right? I mean, if they have 50 leads from a trade show, are they going to close 50 contracts right away? So they need to share the information with you. And, some of the sales team are not necessarily willing to share the information. They're really busy. They're hard to reach. And some of the salespeople, they get worried. Like, why are you looking at doing an analysis on our trade show? We've been going to that event for 10 years. Like, why do you want to know all this data? So the pushback I got was kind of, questioning like the why. And then when I told them, listen, like I need to understand what we're spending. Should we come back next year? There's so many events. There's so many opportunities. If it's not the right time or the right event, and we just change and go somewhere else. So the pushback is really getting data from sales, making sure they understand, why you're doing the whole effort of calculating the ROI. So I report to the CMO, the organization, and they're also one who are pushing for some type of metrics. So I think you just have to be aligned with your product and sales team with what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, there's a lot of alignment with sales, even just in that piece when you're going to and from events. So I could definitely see them being, questioning, why are you looking into this? What do you need to know if it's never been dialed in before? Francois, tell me a little bit about like when it comes down to the measurement, right? And kind of maximizing ROI at these shows for you. Give the audience a little bit of specific into what you installed, what you're tracking, what you're doing, what like, let's get into some of the details.
Yeah. So I'm looking at four criteria, right? When I do my ROI analysis. So the first thing I'm looking at is the new revenue generation, which means after a trade show, you generated some leads. I need to know within a 6 months period of time, because our selling cycle is 6 months. So I need to understand within 6 months of going to a trade show, how much new product have I sold? So continuous communication with sales. We use a CRM system, right, to track that. That's also a very important key to the ROI. It's your CRM system. So for purposes of the exercise, we use Salesforce. So I will be on Salesforce trying to understand within 6 months how much new revenue were generated from that event. Second thing is revenue retention. So these are your existing clients who already have your product, but they buy an upgrade, or they buy a different product, but they're already in your CRM, they're an existing clients. Number 3 is a travel avoidance savings. So that's a very interesting data that I use. What it means is when you're a salesperson and you travel to an event, you're going to meet within 3 days a lot of people that will have take you maybe 20 different sales trips to meet, right? So you spend, let's say, $1,000 in travel and expenses, travel entertainment to go to a trade show, and you get to meet 20 people, right? That could have cost you $20,000 separately to meet those 20 people. So the way we calculate was we take the amount of salespeople who went to an event and we multiply that amount by 1,000, depending where you're going, right? But we come up with saying that the average T&E, travel and expenses, is $1,000. So if I have 3 salespeople going to an event, I can have saved $3,000, and that goes towards my revenue. And then the last things we're looking at, it's called promotional value. And promotional value is really your branding exposure. You have people that are coming to your booth. They are looking at your logo. Maybe one of your CEO is speaking in front of 1,000 people. You have attendees looking at a slide with with a video, with content. Maybe you're sponsoring a reception and you have branding everywhere. So we kind of calculate the number of impressions, how many people were in the event, and we come up with a formula. That's actually something I learned from the CTSN certification. So that's the 4 criteria we're looking at, right? New revenue, retention, travel avoidance, and promotional value.
That's awesome.
So Salesforce is your living document, right? Because Salesforce will tell you from that trade show today, $100,000 were generated in close. So, you want to make sure that this number was tagged to the right event. Yeah. Because sometimes it takes, 5 events, right? It could be a trade show, a meeting in town. They come to our head office. It could be a dinner. You have 4 touch points that then generated a close one. So every time you tag, and we create a campaign every time for one event. So salespeople have to go back to Salesforce and enter their lead and tag them to the right campaign. And that's how you track your selling cycle, right? And you can say, that event influenced the deal of $100,000, for example.
So what do you do about, let's go through those real quick again. You have new revenues, what's being tracked. You have revenue retention, which is existing customers and getting them to spend more, increase their order values. You have travel avoidance, which from my understanding is basically just calculating it would cost each salesperson $1,000 to go travel to see one customer. How many customers did they see? And you're factoring that as a savings and it goes into the cost of the event, right?
Exactly.
And then you have your promotional value, branding, exposure, impressions, and things of that nature. So, walk me through from the new revenue and the revenue retention, right? On that pipeline side of things. Walk me through that. Like, attribution is difficult in big companies, right? Trying to delineate exactly where the sale came from.
Yes.
So are you more so tagging the interactions that you have with an event tag? And then you may not be the original lead source, meaning this person may have already been spoken to, or a prospect, or seen marketing, or talked to a salesperson, but you are saying, hey, we saw them at the event, we engaged with them at the event, and then they became a new customer within 6 months. And that is going to be attributed to events in some way, shape, or form.
Exactly. So salespeople, they're in charge of that. They're the one who go to Salesforce, enters the information. They have to do the right tagging, use the right campaign name, right? So for the big deals, I always triple check. I'll tell them and say, listen, I just see a deal on Salesforce attributing to that event. Are you sure? And sometimes you'll have surprise. Sometimes they'll say, no, François, don't tag it to that event because we met them months ago and the key was, this touch point. So for the big deal, I really try to triple check because I don't want to have, I want to have the most accurate information possible. Because remember, you're doing ROI to make a decision. Am I coming back next year? Do I need a bigger exhibit space? Do I want a bigger sponsorship? Or, should I cut or maybe just attend or maybe go somewhere else? There's so many events.
Don't you think, like, because I've thought about this a bunch, especially the bigger the company that you get, right? Like when you have that big deal, the odds are you can probably figure out the original source, the original way of how they got into your sphere, your pipeline, your ecosystem, right?
Yes.
But it almost doesn't matter because companies with 6-month sales cycles and larger companies, there are a lot of touch points before somebody buys. There's a lot. So to me, one of the things I think about is people get very lost in trying to figure out, no, this was us, we did it. But really, it's always a group thing. It's always multiple touch points and events, in my opinion, like that big deal that gets closed that you say, hey, it didn't originate with us, but you had a touch point. My question is how influential, how influential was that touch point? Because events have this way of being a strong catalyst for pipeline.
So, I definitely want to make sure that we get the credit, right? Especially if we facilitated that deal. It could be a demonstration that request that came from our website and we forwarded to the salespeople. But guess what? At the event, they met and then they did the demo on site. And then they attended a session that maybe one of our experts gave. And then they took them for dinner. So I want to make sure that that events team or marketing gets the credit, not sales. So that's really important because if you don't take the credit at the end of the year, they're not going to see marketing as a strength. So hopefully now, if you do things correctly using the right CRM or some methodology, you'll see the results fairly quickly, and then they'll be willing to work with you all the time. So they'll be like, oh, hey, help me out with creating new opportunities. What can we do at that event to make sure we have demonstration?
So are you only, those new revenue deals, are those only ones that are pretty much like net new deals that come from events? That's
new
what
clients.
You're counting those.
Exactly. Yeah.
New client, and you're the original source of how they got into the pipeline.
Exactly.
Got it. What was interesting was we hosted an event 2 weeks ago, and one of the major discussions was around this ROI, and we did this big think tank and whiteboard, and we're putting together some huge document, but it was with everybody in the room. It was really awesome to just hear from everybody. But one of the things John Wolf from Lenovo spoke about is that they use a weighted system, because there are so many touch points with clients, and it sometimes is difficult to understand who the original lead source, there's so many touch points, they apply points to it. And then at the end of the year, so say that they need 8 points for a conversion or something, right? Like where a sale happens. Well, if events had a really meaningful interaction, they attended a dinner, they stopped by the booth, whatever it may be, they put 4 points of the 8 in that conversion. Well, at the end of the year, they tally those things up to understand the influence on those deals because they're complex. I thought that was very interesting and smart.
And I think also big companies, the issues that we have is cross-selling, right? Because you're talking to a great client, but it will be a perfect fit for another division. So we're dealing with 3 industries: energy, agribusiness, and the weather. So you can have a weather client that actually could be very interesting into an energy deal because it's a utility company, for example. So it gets tricky because then the lead is going to a different division, different budget. They're going to a different event now. So sometimes it is challenging, right? But the key at the end of the day is to justify why you're spending thousands of dollars going to an event. Because at the end of the day, I mean, I would be questioned of why are we spending so much money going to that trade show? And I have the answer. I show them the ROI right away. Here is what happened last year. So that's really important to have.
Do you have a difference in the events? Meaning, like, do you need to be able to check all four of these boxes: ROI, retention, travel avoidance, and promotional value at every single event? Or do you have certain events that are more geared towards your customers, more geared towards prospects, more geared towards brand exposure? How does that work for you?
I will say that new revenue retention and travel avoidance, that's the one I use all the time. The promotional one, it's tricky when it's a small event, because let's say you go to a conference with 500 people, it's hard to monetize. Okay, 200 people went to your session, they look at your logo. It works with a big trade show, right? For the promotional value. So this one is, I don't use it if I go to a smaller event of like 500 people, or you cannot really do promotional value if it's a very small, intimate meetings with like, we do like this dinner where we invite like key people. So maybe that's the one that is a little bit more complicated to use. So I would just rely on new revenue retention and the travel avoidance. Yeah.
When we talked, you had mentioned something, cost of conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
I thought this was interesting. So tell me a little bit about cost of conversation.
Yeah. So that's a new data that my boss at DTN actually sold me on, to be honest with you. I didn't use it before. But what she said was, because our selling cycle could be so long, you're not necessarily having a close one deal from an event. You could generate a lot of opportunities on a few deals come in, but those conversations are really important. So what she told me was, I want you to really find out how many qualified conversations are we getting, because it could be at dinner, it could be somebody you meet at a bar, it could be an acquaintance that comes to see you at the booth, and then you start talking about businesses. Of course, it's a meetings, right? A demonstration. So I think I thought it's super interesting to have to report the number of qualified conversation, which is not about your family and kids, or it's just business conversation about a product or services. And I thought it was a very interesting metrics to show, because at some of the shows you have a lot of conversation going on.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have very few leads, very little conversation. So I thought it was a good one to report.
Yeah, I like that. Kind of like I touched on earlier, I'm kind of finding this big belief that like people need to kind of work backwards when they're doing this. And sometimes people are talking about ROI, but they don't even really know what's going on at their event, right? And what I mean by what's going on at your event is this an event where you attract and meet net new deals? Is it an event where you're meeting people in your pipeline? Is it an event where you're meeting customers and re-engaging with them, with people that haven't bought from you in years, or people that are spending less and you're increasing average sale? Is it a partnership meeting? Like, you kind of have to start there. And I think that's where I'm talking about being a catalyst for then what happens after that. Because all those things don't happen at every single event. 1, 2, or 3 of them happen. If you can get an event that has multiple happening, you do have lightning in a bottle to a degree. And it leads into what you're saying about these cost of conversations, which is the cost of conversation is meaningful interaction. That's really what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
It's being face to face. And that's what an event really drives for companies, which is what I say is like, oh, we didn't get enough leads. Yes, but you're saying that, but you also had a conversation with somebody and ran a demo and then took them to dinner that night, who was in your pipeline that was stalled in a deal, and now a $50,000 deal closed. And it wouldn't happen if it wasn't for that event.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the details and things that happen that I think I'm trying to push people. And we're talking about of like, how do you measure that? How do you quantify that? Because there's like this pixie dust magic with events that people are like, oh, they're awesome, they work. It's like, we know that they work and we know all this cool stuff is happening, but trying to quantify and chisel away at it is very difficult.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Do you have a certain metric for cost of conversation? Do you have a certain, like, is it just a tally? Hey, this is the amount of good convos that we have, or qualified discussions?
What I will take is basically the total cost of of the events, how much it costs to be an exhibitor, the whole sponsorship, and then I divide by the number of qualified conversation, and I just report that metric. So you can compare with those events. Some events are extremely expensive. You have few conversations, so you're looking at an expensive cost of qualified conversation. And then maybe you go to another event where you have a lot of conversation and it's not that expensive. So I'll just take the total cost divided by the number of conversation, and I just report it as a metrics. And
do you have a number that you're looking to hit there at this point?
I don't like if I see like the higher the numbers, but like,
Of course.
we're going to show where it's like, $2,000 per person per session on that. That's the worries, right? That means we haven't talked to a lot of people and it's an extremely expensive trade show, right? So you want a low number, like maybe, $200, $250. That
Oh,
means,
wow. Yeah.
you're walking a lot of conversation for what you spend. So, but yeah, that's a very good one. So when my boss mentioned that to me, I was like, yeah, I could update my methodology now with the new data. And I think it's a really good one to consider to keep.
I like that. Who judges the conversations? Who deems them qualified? Do you have a system for that?
Basically, it's me telling the salespeople, can you tell me how many? I mean, we have a briefing before they go to the event, and I always tell them, please monitor conversation, which means, meaningful business. Take a note of roughly how many conversations you're going to have over 2 days. And they're pretty diligent. Normally, I'll take notes I'll just report on a spreadsheet details. So that's really important. And that spreadsheet is what I use when I try to quantify the business opportunities, right? So they'll say, I met with Matt from this company. We talk about a potential $100,000. And then they'll just put all these numbers to a spreadsheet. And that helps me calculating the business opportunities associated with the events.
So when you're using these 4 pillars of new revenue, revenue retention, travel audience, and promotional value, and cost of conversation, are you kind of reverse engineering your strategy at the show? Meaning, are you building things around the outcomes that you want, right? So obviously these are outcomes that you're looking to gain.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
are you kind of reverse engineering a strategy through them?
So it's great what you mentioned, because you're saying the opposite. Like, because I ran into that a few months ago where we were trying to do that, and I'm trying to give you a good example of. So you're saying like, okay, we need to make $1 million in closed deal. So let's find an event where to generate $1 million, we need to have that many opportunities, that many people needs to be at the show.
I would say 2 forms I would call. One is like a data. Yes, working backwards from data like you're talking about, right? The other side for me is, yes, that's like meetings and right, like what are you trying to set that makes you create your objectives. But then the other piece is, are you setting yourself up for success so that you can accomplish it with your booth, with your activations, with what I would call your approach? Right. So you have to create, you can't just say, oh, we want to do X meetings and return this ROI at this show. Well, what's your approach? How are you getting those meetings? Where are those meetings taking place? How are you engaging them? Have you guys built kind of work backwards there yet? Or
we try the goal is to make 10 times ROI of what we spend. So that means if we go to a trade show that cost us $25,000, we expect a minimum of $250,000 in closed won deals. I mean, that was one thing we tried to do, but realistically, it's really hard because first of all, it's going to take me months before I can show that ROI. And then, like you said before, some of the deal will be tagged to other events, right? So do I take a percentage of that deal? So we try to tell salespeople, like, be aware, we spend $25K on that event. We really want you to make 215 sales, so they understand, they realize. There was another methodology where we said that one salesperson should be able to pre-schedule 10 meetings before a trade show.
Yeah.
So if you send 3 salespeople, you expect 30 meetings prior to. But the reality, Matt, is like to do that, you need to have access to the list of attendees, which we don't have necessarily when you go to big trade show. Sometimes because they go to back-to-back events, they don't have time to schedule like 10 meetings. So you can tell them whatever you want at the end of the day. They're the one who have to make that's their job. On sometimes it's more like at the event, everything happening at the events.
So when you're taking your spend, is this like at big trade shows too, to say that you want a 10X on close one deal? Do you have a pipe? Any trade show? And are you talking the booth space, the booth, the sponsorship, every dollar spent to be there?
T&Es, everything. Like I'm sending 10 people. I'm estimating it's $1,000 T&E per person. That's 10,000 in T&Es, the sponsorships, the electrical, everything, because that's investment.
The whole spend to be at a trade show. So if you have $100,000 spend, you're looking for $1 million in closed deals within 6 months.
That's the ideal target, right?
Got it.
That's
what we have a pipeline number.
What do you mean?
Like if you have, like if you're seeking $1 million in closed deals, I would imagine, I don't know, maybe you have $2 million in pipeline and you close 50% of it, right? Like a pipeline style number.
Yeah, but no, I mean, we just tell them the objective because they need to understand how expensive it is. Sometimes they don't realize how expensive. Yeah, I just want to monitor for a demo. Well, a monitor nowadays, as you know, at $3,000 only doesn't include the electrical, right? So it's not just, I want 2 monitors, because we're going to run a couple of demos. No, it's like, listen, I mean, are you going to run demos? Yes or no? And how many? Because, you're looking at possibly $5,000, and then you add all of this. So,
Yeah.
everybody need to understand that it's expensive on that. We're monitoring things now, so you want to go back next year, fantastic, but you have to show me, what you're going to do, right? And what's going to happen at the show. So, I mean, it's to the benefits. And I think, this sees us as a valuable resources, right? I mean, we're professional. It raised the profile of the events team, right? I mean, we know what we're doing. We come up with metrics. We're very interested with sales. I think 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's different, right? Maybe it's more like meeting planners, just like planning, but now it's different.
Yes.
For marketers, right? I mean, I'm involved in sales deals sometimes at the events, and I try to, understand what's going on. So, I think we're highly more educated now.
I think the event marketer has evolved a lot and will continue to evolve. Like the demand of what they're being asked to do and the change in events is pretty large, I think, even in the last like 3-4 years since we came back out from COVID. So with this information and with these shows, how do you decide on your sponsorship package, on the size of your exhibit space, on how much you spend on your booth, on the activations you run offsite? Like, how are you making those decisions?
So it's basically depending, and with the audience, what product are we pushing? What our competition? Look at our competition very closely. What is our direct competitors doing? I mean, I want, if I'm going to an event and we're thinking of being an exhibitor, or none of my competitors are exhibiting, but they're all speaking or sponsoring, I'll be questioning myself, right? So we look at our competition, the target audience, the size of the event. I mean, if you go to a really big trade show, do we want to have a 10 by 10? No, probably want to have a bigger exhibit space, right?
Yeah.
Are we launching any product? I mean, we have tons of product. When we do launch, we need to have a big impact on an event. We have a bigger booth. We go to events where everybody knows DTN and they know our products. We don't have to have a huge exhibit space. Sometimes a sponsorship is what we need just to support the organization that is producing the trade show. Or it could be, speaking is really key for us, right? To be on a panel as a moderator or as an expert. Coming as a client, if you can present kind of a case study, that's really powerful, right? To the audience, you have your expert with your clients. So sometimes you have to pay for that. So, if it's all about content, then, we'll try to get a spot. And sometimes it's all about networking. So we'll do a sponsorship. So, yeah.
So when you're deciding year over year to exhibit the next year, attend a show or sponsor it, do you have a bit of like a rolling number now, seeing as you have a 6-month cycle, right? That's part of the thing that people hesitate on, is that when they have a long sales cycle, I mean, some people have 24-month sales cycles, 12-month or 16, 18-month, right? So they start measuring, but then they're like, I don't have all the information I need, but you kind of got to get going just to get going. So you can start to appropriate data. So what data are you using to make a decision? Because I know the shows are asking you the second the show is done to re-sign.
You're right. So I look at the opportunities created on Salesforce, for example.
Yeah.
So opportunities meaning, it's just, it's an opportunity, hopefully will be converted to a sale. But like you said, you have trade show where I don't see any close one deal, but there's $1 million in opportunity, right? So I see how many conversations they had at the event, how many leads. We had a debriefing, and I feel strong about renewing the trade show. The problem I have is if I see a huge expense, very little opportunity, 0 close one, it's 6 months after the trade show, we don't see any traction.
Yeah.
This is where I will be questioning why we're going to the events. But I want to give you a very good example of a situation I run into on that's a really good example. So I was a head of events a few years ago for a ratings agency in New York.
Okay.
And they used to go to a very huge conference in Miami in February, right? So picture Miami in February, everybody wants to go.
Yeah.
And we used to have, they used to send, 30 people.
Mm-hmm.
They had a 20 by 20 booth, big exhibit presence, right? And remember, I started with the company and they asked me to look at the numbers, the analysis. And what I realized was that everybody knew us, very slow traffic at the booths. All our competitors were speaking. None of them were exhibiting. And the cost of us participating was extremely expensive, right? You had a very large presence. You were sending 30 people. So what I decided to do was to stop exhibiting because it didn't make sense. They all knew our product. We started to invest in securing a speaking opportunity. We secured a private meeting room to talk to our clients.
Yeah.
And we reduced the total of people from 30 to, I think we signed like 8 people because we had 2 speakers, somebody to handle the meetings. So obviously you're going to upset a lot of salespeople who for the last 10 years have been going to Miami in February, handling the booth with no traffic. But that's an example of if you show them the data, saying, listen, we're not getting any business from that event. Why?
Yeah.
Because everybody knows us and they're not doing business at that event. And while we're having a booth, if there's no traffic and there's no conversations going on, everybody is in meetings. So that was one where, you start investing in different areas, you save money. We had a huge ROI after a couple of years. So
I think
that's
it's
an
a great,
example.
I think it's a great example for people to listen to. I ask a question all the time, which is, does your strategy and approach make sense based on your return? Because that's what you're saying is strategy. Like approach is, people are always like, what's approach? I'm like, well, even the number of people that you're bringing could be approach. Size of your booth. Do you exhibit? Do you not? Do you host a meeting room? Do you do a dinner? Do you throw a private event? Do you do a speaking opportunity? Do you teach a class? What do you do? Where do your dollars go? Because the show could be $100,000 investment for you, or it could be a $50,000 investment or a $30,000. So that's where the approach comes in. And then you're saying, okay, with those funds, how are we going to engage our customer and try to drive pipeline? That's it.
No. And exactly. I'll give you another good example so we're going to a very big mining show in October in Las Vegas. It's every 4 years. It's a massive trade show. And we're thinking about, what we do for clients. I mean, we're going to do like entertainment and take them out for dinner. We're not, because there's so much larger companies at that trade show with millions of dollars of budget. They're the one we're going to basically take care of the entertainment and taking them to all these great shows.
Parties and throwing things. Yeah.
Exactly. We can compete with them, right? For that specific industry. So we're going to have a nice presence with a booth. We'll try to reach out to people ahead of time. We have the list of attendees, but it's still going to spend money. It's at the booth. We're not going to do any type of entertainment because we know they're not going to show up at whatever, because they're going to go to, other places.
I think about those shows like that, like those nuances matter when you talk about strategy, approach, and dollars. So here you have a show that's only once every 3 to 4 years. And I know a lot of shows like that.
Yeah.
I can tell you shows like that, people feel like they have to be there. Big shows like that are a circus because they're only every 3, 4 years. Everybody goes, everybody exhibits, and not everybody's real exhibitors either. And the show is kind of wonky because it's not every single year. So like you're smart by thinking, okay, you're gonna have these big companies throwing huge money, doing all this stuff. Why compete with them there?
Yeah.
I would, if I was you, I would be thinking about what are they not going to be doing? What is it that they're not going to do? What's an area that they're not going to think of, that they're not going to double down in, that you could double down in, right? That you could do something that would be identifiable and recognizable where you could put your dollars and stand out. And I think that would be my line of thinking there.
No, it's a great line of thinking. And so we have a couple of ideas, but like you said, it takes a team to come up with ideas and to strategize. And, on some people, they're like, salespeople will be like, well, how come we're not taking clients, at the shows? And I'm like, well, you're not going to have any clients because they're going to go with the other companies, So, we just have to be smart. And, we'll do a lot of activities at the booth, and we have like a on-display product, and, so it's going to be very interesting. But, sometimes you just have to be realistic, right, with what you can do.
I think so. I mean, I've never seen that show. I've not been a part of it, so it's hard for me to tell. But I think thinking that way is strategy, approach. It's thinking about the dollars that are going to go in versus the pipeline that can created coming out. And essentially, if you're not creating pipeline coming out of an event, I'm really unsure what you're doing. If you're not creating catalyst, if you're not a catalyst for pipeline, or you're not creating momentum, or you're not creating traction. Traction. I don't know what you're doing. So I think it's a good approach there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about, you've touched a couple times on sales, being at the events and kind of that alignment. That's always a huge discussion. Event people, marketing people, always frustrated with sales, always trying their best to work with them. I'm sure sales in return, same way, thinking same thing. What's that relationship like when you're on the event side working with sales?
So I had different experience throughout my career. In financial services, I found that there was definitely a big line between sales and marketing. I felt like on side they didn't want necessarily us to stick around at the booth and kind of you did your part, now let us do our job. With TTN, I mean, it's a really big synergy, and I think they're totally open for us to be at the booth, listening to the conversation. marketing needs to understand what's going on at the booth, right? With those conversations. So, it's really open, for us to be to support them, right? So it depends on the corporate culture. Some companies don't necessarily like marketing to help them on site. They appreciate their job, the work, and that's it. But I think it's really important. On GTN is definitely doing a great job at listening to marketing and sales. And we're the one paying for the event. Let's not forget that corporate marketing is paying for events sponsorship. So, when I get requests all the time, hey, we have a great event, can we sponsor it? And it's always, well, I wish I could say yes, but I need to understand the target audience and what product are you thinking of pushing and what do you have in mind? Why? And so they'll do a business case they're really open sometimes to saying, hey, this is a unique opportunity. Can we move fast? Now I'll just do everything I can to move it fast, right? So, but I think it's really important to work well with product, sales, and marketing.
Do you have any advice for like a younger event marketer that's getting into event marketing and has to work with product and has to work with, sales, go to market, like any advice for them to try to get on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, I love the question. Advice would be, I think, find your passion, what drives you in life. It's really important. I personally would have been miserable if I would be working for, in front of a computer from 9 to 5, by myself, trading, for example. So, find really what motivates you, right? For event marketing, it's either you work for an agency or you're on the buyer side, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you start. I think you shouldn't force yourself to, I want to work for an agency. I have to work. I think both sides of the business have the advantage. I think keep the learning is very important. Have the opportunity to learn, keep education. I think I was being very fortunate to work for companies that always give me the opportunity to do a certification like CTSM. Some companies have learning classes, and I highly recommend just to take advantage of that, especially if you work for a big organization. I wouldn't build your network. Don't underestimate your school or network. I think I get a lot of information from my peers, ideas, solutions. I think it's very important to share project, where does it go good or not. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's all. What does success look like for the event program for you, right? At DTN, like what are there certain benches and things you're looking to hit with your trade shows and events? Like, you have this way of measuring, you have this way of understanding where to exhibit, where to sponsor, and then how to activate per se. But do you have a certain goal for the year, or, do you know what success looks like?
One of the things you look at is partnership, right? Which means it's not necessarily something we sell or, upgrade or, a savings. It's more about partnership, right? So it's finding new partners at these events. They are big into that. So, that's one of the metrics we look at. It's, a partnership was created from that trade show, and that generated another event. Relationship, right? Sometimes we just, I'm just saying, we wish we would do business with, I'm just saying with Motorola, for example. And then suddenly we have a conversations going on with them at an event. For the first time, somebody has a foot into the company. They'll value that. So, now we have one contact, that's thanks to that event. So partnership conversation are really keys for us.
I know you have different areas with what you work on, or industries, or
yes,
parallels, I guess you'd say, right? But do you have instances where you see not the same people, but you would see the same person at maybe 2 events or 3 events, and there's some continuity to seeing them? Because I have found from talking to people that their strategies essentially, they just get these face-to-face touch points every year, multiple times, different areas, different cities, and different shows, different settings. But they're using those over and over to build rapport and build relationship.
You mean from a client perspective or from an employee perspective?
I'd say from client and prospect. Are there shows where you're seeing the same person people multiple times?
It's a good question. I don't have the impression that's one of the things that one of the concern, seeing the same people. We target specific people in one company, and I think once we have that person buying, it's okay if we see them at, because, we're also one we learn about the product.
Oh, no, I would want to see them. That's why I'm asking. I would want to see people multiple times per year.
Well, especially I would say in agribusiness, which is a very US market. That's where, you'll see the same, clients over and over, where weather, energy is international. So, yeah.
Nice. Francois, it's been great having you on to discuss, the ROI and the event marketing kind of measurements side of things with what you do. Where can people find you? How can they contact you?
On LinkedIn, that's the best way to connect with me, on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Awesome. Thanks for talking today. Really liked hearing about cost of conversation and just kind of the way you all approach your events. I like that you have a system. I think this is a day and age where people need to just create a system. They need to take someone like yourselves or pieces of others and just get measuring, get calculating, get putting information into Salesforce or spreadsheets so that then it can start to help push their decisions in the right directions. And they just have to know that they're going to figure it out as they go. There's no perfect system that you just start with. And then the next day you have the data that you want. It takes years of putting it together.
No, absolutely. And then, like I said before, like you want to be seen as a strategic resources in your company. I mean, that's what's going to help you in your career. I mean, you want to raise your profile. You want salespeople to turn to you. Hey, can you help me with that event? I mean, do you think we should be going? Or, help me make a decision for next year. Like, what should we do? I mean, you want to be able to help step in and say, this is what I recommend, right? I mean, you want to be seen as a professional, with your team of, you can get it done and you know how to do a report on, how to make a decision and not like, I don't know, or, you should know. I mean, so
I think it's a good way to close this out is you saying that you want to be a strategic resource. I had Nancy Toohill on from LexisNexis, and she talked a lot about being a strategic partner inside the organization. It's the same thing. Right. And I think event people, if they want to elevate their profile at the company and they're looking to push their career further down the line, and I don't want to say move up the corporate ladder, but get different jobs and elevate their status, which most people do. You have to go from being an event person to being a business person and mixing the two. And that ROI, those analysis, those figures, those numbers, understanding what's happening at your shows and not just executing them is what I keep hearing from smart people who are executing events.
No, absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, like, this is what I bring to the table at TTN, right? I mean, they hired me initially to really do a complete analysis of all the events, right? Because they didn't have anybody who spent time doing, ROI on. This is what I brought to the table. I had a methodology. I knew what I was doing. I give them a concrete example, and I told them, I can do it right away. This is not something that's going to take me 2 years to do, right? I mean, ROI report, I can do it tomorrow. Just give me the data, I can do the ROI. And I think companies will appreciate that. Like, wow, this is great.
Awesome. Francois, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you tuning in with us and hanging out for a little bit.
Good.
Awesome.
Okay.